Okay, I think it is now working. Hopefully you can see me and hear me. If you're watching live, do let me know if you can hear me. I've been doing this for a while now, so it should all work, but I also do mess up quite a lot. I just check and I can see my face there. There is a live chat as always, so if you're watching this live, feel free to make comments, critiques, have conversation. If you have any questions, just put a Q and then put your question. There's only like 180 characters, so if your question is longer, you might just put it into 2 bits, but you'll figure it out. I believe in you. Oh, hey, Roger, Tom, Leah, Chris. Hello, everybody. Hear me loud and clear. I appreciate it. It's getting darker these nights, so I've got a light behind me. Hopefully I don't look too in the dark. Oh yeah, Leah, I know, work away, that's okay. Appreciate you listening while you work. And that's that. Let me see. Okay, so I'm excited about the material for tonight. I want to give a little bit of a preamble, and then we'll kind of get into it. I also am just coming off the back of Spark, which I had a wonderful experience of that. And actually, something that we did at Spark connects directly with this talk. So if I remember, I kind of might bring that in. And we have Wake coming up in May, which will be in Belfast. So if you're interested in Wake, this is also going to be connected to the theme. And so check my website out, you can find out more there. I will also be in Los Angeles in a couple of weeks, going to do an event with Rob. Very excited about that, the Rob Bell. We have not done anything together for years. Obviously I've been back in Ireland for a while. I mean, I moved back and forth, but so we just kind of reconnected last year, and I'm going to do a live Robcast, but we're going to do it in person. So there's tickets, so people can go live, or I think it'll be on his Patreon after the fact. So I'm excited about that. I'm also doing a talk in Pasadena, which is free. That is on maybe the 7th of December, maybe the 9th of December. But I should put that on my website, but I will advertise it on my Instagram, so you'll find out about that. Okay, let us get started. So what do I want to do today? Well, basically, we've been doing this work for a long time, and I use the word we, not in the royal we, but including at least some of you who are watching this. This is a work that many of you have been engaged in with me for many, many years, particularly people who support me on Patreon, but not just the financial support, but also being part of the book studies, the conversations, the Zoom rooms, all of the stuff that goes on there. Together, we are honing this work. And it's funny, somebody said to me, it was last year, more of a professional person, and they said, Pete, are you not worried? How are you going to protect your work from being stolen by other people? Which is funny. And they were wanting to set me up potentially to talk to a lawyer. And I was like, well, first of all of this work, I am begging, borrowing, and stealing from everywhere. I'm taking great work and great thinkers and bringing it together, working with people live in my Patreon, kind of honing these ideas. And then secondly, I want these ideas to be stolen. I want people to go out and practice and experiment with this stuff that we're doing. I want you to do that. And it requires a bit of luck to be successful, a bit of grit, and a little bit of wisdom. And you've got a little bit of those 3 things, you can get this stuff done. And I'm really hoping that many of you will do this, because if you're waiting for me to do it, I do things occasionally, but I definitely need other people to go out and do this stuff. And what is this stuff? Well, basically there are 3 legs to this work that can come under the umbrella at the moment of Church of the Contradiction. There is the liturgy, there are the decentering practices, and there is the communion. And the liturgy, I've done a lot of work on that. There's loads of work. done a pretty good amount of work on the decentering practices. You can go back on my YouTube. There's thousands of hours of material and all of that stuff. And in fact, there's too much material. I have people coming to me and sometimes saying, where should I start? What's the first thing I should listen to? And I have no idea. And I had this with a friend who was at Spark, actually. She was doing some stuff there. And she said to me, the first thing I clicked on of yours, I didn't understand it at all. I turned it off and I walked away from it for a whole year. And she only came back to it when we were sitting down and talking. And it also made me think that, oh yeah, there's so much material out there. If someone clicks on the wrong thing, it might just leave them cold. So another thing that I'm hoping to do someday, or maybe one of you will do, is figure out what are the few best things for people to listen to if they're starting to think about this. I would maybe even like green, amber, and red, right? What are a few podcasts or talks that are really good introductory? What are a few ones that are good intermediary? And what are a few that are a little bit deeper? So anyway, I would love to do that. That's an aside. But where was I? Yes, I was talking about, oh yeah, the three stools. There's, say, liturgy, decentering practices, communion. Communion is the third leg. And actually, that has only started to come together really this year. So I think this is the final leg of the stool. They're all interconnected, but this third element, I kind of knew there was something missing. And I think finally, I've kind of come to understand what this is. And it is a social bond forged around a shared lack. Now, again, I've done a few talks on this in the last few months, so you can go back and listen to those to find out more. This is another talk to add to this notion of communion. I'm not going to cover the stuff I've covered in the past. We're going to move on. And this is related to the issue of love. And it's connected to this idea of loving your enemy, which is a really interesting moral injunction within Christianity. It's potentially the only moral innovation within Christianity. So most of the morality and the teachings of Christianity, you find elsewhere. But what was interesting is this love of your enemy is a particularly interesting innovation within the kind of the New Testament. And I think it is incredibly significant. There's an amazing book that we read together, Richard Boothby's Embracing the Void, and I would really recommend it as a very deep reflection on what love your enemy means. So I recommend that book, but I'm also going to talk about that in relation to this notion of communion. So to do this, I'm going to talk about three different types of love. And the first two, I don't know if I would want to say that they are authentic love, and that will become clear in a second, but there are three ways that we can think of this term love, which is this very powerful bond with another, right, with other people, a particularly powerful bond that is not about using people, but about connecting at some deep level. So I will offer a definition of love after point two, once I've covered the material and then the mental, then I'll give a definition of love, and then I'll cover the third, which is the moral. So I've made all 3 points beginning with C and letter. I like to do that. And it kind of works. There is, say, the material, the mental, and the moral. And the moral could also be described as objective. The mental could be described as subjective, and the material, have to think about how I would describe that. I mean, it's subjective to some extent, but anyway, it'll become clear. So what do I mean by material sense of love? In a nutshell, I'm thinking about the type of love that comes out of a economic calculation. We're talking about arranged marriages. We're talking about marrying for money or status or security, or in the past where you would marry in order to protect an inheritance or to create a relationship with another country or kingdom. So it would be a way of ensuring peace between two potentially warring nations. So that material notion of love still is alive and well in different forms, but the most obvious forms of it are things like, as I say, arranged marriages and marriages that are about inheritance or are about peace treaties, etc., etc. So that's a material notion of love. Then there is the mental notion of love. And by that I mean the psychological notion of love. Love as a feeling of finding someone, the hormones and all of that are released, and the things in the brain, oxytocin or whatever, that are released that make you feel amazing. And unlike the material notion of love, which is less about your subjective or psychological experience, and more about some sort of social contract. So maybe I would say that first one's social contract, the second is subjective, the third is objective. So material is about social contracts of various kinds that definitely had a lot of value at various times and continue to in various ways, needs must and all of that. But the mental is the psychological notion of love, which most of us are most familiar with, which is where you meet somebody, you feel really good when you encounter them. There's this sense of connection, the sense that they might complete you even, that they might give you something that you are missing, that they might enrich and fulfill your life. And it's not a material thing as such, it is a psychological fulfillment. So the first is a material fulfillment, the second is a subjective psychological fulfillment. But then there is the third, and the third I'm calling moral, the moral notion of love. Now, before I define that, I'll just give a brief definition of love. This definition comes from the tradition of continental philosophy and psychoanalysis, and broadly speaking, I'm not going to get into it in too much depth, but there's this idea that love connects not with what is the same, like what in the other you find familial, that you find is something that, like, you know, you like the same music, you like the same people, you dislike the same people, you have the same beliefs, you have the same class, whatever it is, right? You have something that is the same, right? Love is connected to the otherness of the other. When you get to the level of love, you know that you're in love because it's not that the social bond, the connection you have with the other comes out of what you can name, what you can list, right? Why do you love me? And I can list 10 reasons why I love you. It's precisely the thing you cannot name, the je ne sais quoi, the enigmatic dimension of the other's desire. That's the bits that love connects to. And this relates to, in psychoanalysis, this notion of what's called the enigmatic signifier, that what connects the child and the primary caregiver is, at a very deep level, not simply the biological benefits that the baby gets, right? So there's that's fine. It's more that at a certain point, the infant begins to ask the question, what does the other desire of me? What does the other want? And this enigmatic question of the other's desire is what links the two people together. What does the other desire? What does the other want? And as I've said many times, using people like Lacan and Girard, our desire is always related to the desire of the other. Our desires are never authentically our own. Our desires are formed and shaped and gifted by others. We desire the desire of the other. We desire to be desired by the other. And that dimension is their otherness, the thing that you cannot say. And that enigmatic dimension of the other is, another word for that is their lack, the thing that is missing. And what makes a person, what makes a person singular is their symptoms. All of we are similar in so many ways, and there's so many various identity markers that we have. But when it comes to our symptoms, they are very idiosyncratic. They are singular. They are unique. They are the responses, our particular responses to that lack, to that enigma that we are, to that mystery that we are. So in this definition, love is not, as I say, connected to kind of liking somebody because they're the same as us, because they might complete us, because they've got something substantive to give us. But in a way, love is providing a harbor for the other's otherness, for the other's lack. It's an openness to that part of them that, that they cannot name and that you cannot name, that makes them who they are, has a particular shape. If you think of a vase that has a certain shape, that basically shapes the lack that's within it. So a vase has an empty middle, and the shape of the vase gives that lack a certain shape. And so the people that we love, we are open to the shape of their lack. We allow ourselves to be confronted by that. And that's very difficult, because that's what we want to close ourselves off from. We want to surround ourselves with people who reflect us back to ourselves, to hang out with people who might look like us or think like us, have the same enemies as us, the same friends as us. This is a very natural thing for us to do. But love arises when you confront the otherness of the other. And by the way, this is why dating apps can be so difficult, because dating apps often, what people do is they list the things that they want, right? So they want someone who has the same political views, the same religious views often, likes the same hobbies, right? So you kind of list what you like, and you're looking for someone who might either mirror the things that you like or give you the things that you think you're missing, right? So you maybe think you're missing something materially, so you're looking for someone to provide that, right? So dating apps do that. The problem is that is a very suffocating environment for love. Now, it might be necessary, right? It's the only thing we've got, but it still can be suffocating to love, because love erupts whenever you encounter sometimes somebody who is completely different from you, that you bump into in the street somehow, like someone drops some shopping and you help them pick it up, and then you start to talk, and you're two different people, two completely different sets of ideas and beliefs and views of the world. But somehow this moment, this miraculous little ability where you are open to their otherness and they're open to your otherness, and somehow you briefly open each other up to that in a way that creates love, this love bond, right? And all love bonds are trauma bonds, because trauma is lack and lack is, whatever, we won't get into that. But anyway, so in love, that's why the great stories like Romeo and Juliet or any great romantic movies are often precisely people who are different coming together, and it being maybe disastrous, like in Romeo and Juliet. These two families that Romeo and Juliet represent and are part of, that are at war with each other, they're not supposed to get together. They don't have anything in common, but it's in precisely that space of otherness that something can happen. And that's why love is so unpredictable, because in a way you can't plan it. You can't just go on to a dating app and say, I'm going to find love tonight. It's a weird thing that can, take 10, 15, 20 years, never happen, whatever. But when it happens, it can happen just completely out of the blue in that weird moment where the stars collide. But it's to do with, that space where you can encounter the other. And I think dating apps should try and do this. I think dating apps should, maybe they do, some of them, but should occasionally throw you into a connection with someone who's very, very different from you. There's a lot of danger to that. So a lot of arguments would happen, whatever, but also kind of something interesting can happen there. Okay, so that's a basic definition of love. And maybe I'll do a whole talk on that at some point, maybe on Valentine's Day. But okay, so this brings me now to the third notion of love. So I've talked about the material, and I've talked about the mental, so the psychological. And by the way, this is interesting with psychoanalysis. Why psychoanalysis is so critical often of psychology, particularly French psychoanalysis. Because psychology tends to think of the subject as psychological, right? The subject is psychological. So some people might think of the subject as biological, and then in psychology, the subject is psychological. Whereas in proper psychoanalysis, the subject is structural, is linguistic. The subject is the result of language. I won't talk about that in too much detail, but that will maybe become clear as I talk about this third notion of love, because it's structural, it's not mental, it's not psychological, it's not biological, it's not material. It is a type of moral position that one takes. It's objective, it's not subjective, it's objective. And what I mean by that is that love, in this moral sense, is a commitment to being open to the otherness of the other. That's it, right? So this connects with love your enemy, because if loving your enemy means you have to like the person, or just hear their story and then you can connect and all of this beautiful stuff, right? Then that's just so twee. It's so shallow. It's so superficial, right? It doesn't work. So can we make any sense of this notion of love your enemy? Well, yes, and I think this connects with the biblical tradition, particularly the Gospels and Christ, is if you're open to the otherness of the other, it doesn't mean you like the person. It doesn't mean you accept the person and what they're doing at all. It simply means that you're open to a certain space in which they are able to express their own doubt, their own unknowing, their own trauma, and where you as well are able to express that. And that is this objective notion of love. And why I call it objective is because it's not subjective, it's not psychological, it's not about liking people, right? And it's not material, it's not about doing this in order to get something. It is objective, it's an objective thing. If you're doing that, you are in love with the person in that moment. And this comes to this notion of communion. So as many of you know, we're experimenting at the moment with spaces that in some respects look a little bit like AA in a superficial way. You are in a circle, although I'm really interested in a different seat arrangement, which is sometimes called the snowflake arrangement, where the chairs are basically chaotically positioned. So you might be looking to someone's side, their back, their side, almost like a constellation of stars. And then, so I think that constellation of chair arrangement might be a useful one to explore, but that's beside the point. In this space, someone says their name and they say that they're lacking, or that they're failing, or that they're struggling. They basically, in one word or one sentence, they say that they lack, that they struggle, that they have trauma. And once everybody who wants to say that has said it, then there's 60 minutes where people can just talk about what that means to them, free associate. They might talk about a dream, they might go, this made me think of this, they might tell a story, a childhood memory, and the conversation will be sparked by what's going on in the room. The idea is, for that 60 minutes or that 90 minutes, you are open to hearing the lack in the other, and you're open to exposing and expressing that yourself. And what I want to say is, if you're doing that, you are loving the people in that room. You might not like them, you might hate them, but in that space where you are open to hearing them articulate their lack, and you're open to exposing your own lack, in that experience, you are objectively in love with those people in that room. And for me, that is a moral commitment. It's a moral commitment because you decide once a week or once a month, I'm going to go into that space and I'm going to sit there, and I know I don't like some of the people in that room. I might hate some of the people in that room, but for this 60 minutes, I am going to express my own lack in my own words at the beginning, in that one word or that one sentence. Everybody else is, and in a place of grace where no one's asking anybody to change, people can freely symbolize what that lack means to them, what is going on in their life. We've been doing this, by the way, on my Patreon, and we're doing it twice a month at the moment. Soon we're going to go to once a month, I think. And the idea is you ask people to just try and be committed to coming to that once a month and to engage with this for no economic reason, for no material reason, no psychological reason. It's a moral commitment, a structural thing, an objective position. And in light of this, Lacan famously said, and I've quoted this many times, love is giving what you do not have to someone who does not want it. And if you think about this in relation to communion, this space, you go, giving what you do not have, which is your lack. You do not have, that's what you precisely don't have. So you're giving your doubt, your unknowing, your traumatic kind of sense of questioning. You're giving that, and no one wants that. Because what you want is someone to be strong and be there for you, be able to complete you in some sort of way. That's what we kind of want in terms of our material notions of love and our psychological notions of love. They're all about getting something, right? But in this experience of the moral, you are giving what you do not have to people who do not want it. And yet, something incredible can happen in that space. It's not all angels and butterflies and candy floss for everyone, right? These spaces can be very difficult. I was talking to my friend who's a psychoanalyst, Chris Fry, a wonderful man, and he does group psychoanalysis, and that's what he was doing at Spark, this kind of space. And he was telling me how dangerous these spaces can be because they bring up all kinds of things very quickly sometimes. And fights can happen, people can be inappropriate, and there's a kind of inherent risk to a space in which you go, express your lack, and where you have minimal rules. Like you've got a frame, which is what we say in here is just for here, and we want to be committed to coming back to this as much as possible for a given period of time, and we want to try to listen well, right? So you have this basic frame, but in that all sorts of things can happen. But somehow in the moral commitment to going to that space and doing this, you are loving, whether you psychologically feel like you are, whether it's giving you anything materially, or none of that. It's you are objectively loving the people in that room, no matter how you feel. Now, the trick is that I believe that communion does form a very particular type of social bond, a very powerful one that can have a very important, significant effect in our lives. But we don't do it for that reason. It's like we share our misery for no reason, but somehow by sharing the misery, we find a certain lightness and even a humor to it. We can kind of somehow find that the weight of what we're carrying is dissipated, that the sting of what we are carrying is somehow drained of its poison. And that's a beautiful thing. But I don't want to paint this as some utopian ideal. This idea of communion, which is basically, comes from the term where like a meal around the death of God, the loss of the absolute, right? So this is a communion where we share our lack, the fundamental lack, together. In that, a social bond is formed, and I say it's not going to miraculously change our lives overnight, but I think it is a very powerful type of social bond that is different from community, different from social bonds that are forged around the same and identities that we share. This is identities around what we share in negatively, what we share in a sense of the enigma, the mystery that all of us inhabit and are inhabited by. That is what we give, and that is a gift. When you're in that space of communion, when you speak your lack, you're giving a gift. You're giving the gift of nothing. There's something very beautiful when you're in that space and someone says something very profoundly painful. There's a sense in which it humanizes you. It's a sense in which it melts you. It's a sense in which your heart feels like it's just a bit more fleshy than before, a bit less like stone. They've given you a gift. In giving you what you do not want, giving what they do not have, their own lack, giving you what you do not want, it becomes the most precious gift of all. And again, I want to emphasize that this is objective love, structural love, it's moral love. It's not love that's psychological. It's not love that is, say, material or biological. It is love that is a type of commitment to the torrent, to the tornado that is the otherness of the other. And it's so difficult. It's moral because this is the thing that we want to protect ourselves from. The other's otherness is the source of a real bond. It can be, but it can also be the thing that we hate most about the other. There's something about the other that you cannot know. They've got secret, disgusting desires that put you off, that disgust you, that kind of makes you feel funny. If you think about this very practically, the example of if someone's playing loud music. I had this actually recently, although I knew the guy, so it wasn't bad, but the young guys next door were having a Halloween party and their music was blasting. But I've had that when I lived in a working class estate, where you were sometimes in paper thin walls and you would hear the music of the other next door, and the person might be a paramilitary or whatever. And there's a sense in which it's very anxiety producing because there's something about they're having desire, they're having their party, they're doing something that's kind of like, it's almost like their otherness is a threat, is something that's being imposed on you with this music that you hear. And if you think of that feeling, go like, yes, this is the thing that makes love moral, where you go, hold on, I'm going to be open to that dimension of the other, not be threatened by it, but somehow allow it to be spoken and be able to be courageous enough and moral enough to hear it, and also to share my own otherness, my own lack. So I think it's a moral thing, and I want to emphasize that because when I'm doing communion with people and we set up these groups, I kind of want to say you're doing something moral by being here. I also want to tell people it's going to be really hard. It's going to sometimes bring up stuff that you do not like. You're often not going to like the people in the room. And sometimes things are going to be said that kick things off. But if you can be committed to coming to that space once a week or once a month for a year, something transformative will happen. The gift of the other's lack, basically in loving, which is by being in that space for, say, a year, being open continually to the other's lack, you will find that that is a gift to you. And the great thing is you don't do it for economic reasons. It's very, very difficult. You do it because, you're wanting to be in that space of love. But it becomes a gift. And potentially it creates healthier relationships. I think that's mostly what I want to say about that. I think, these are just provisional thoughts and ideas that we're going to develop a bit more as in the next couple of years. But I also don't want to overcomplicate it. That's as simple as that. If you hear these ideas and you go, I want to set up this, I call them Death of God's Supper Clubs as well. So I want to set up a Death of God's Supper Club. What do you need? A room, maybe get some sandwiches and a chairs. And you sit there, and if you're a facilitator, you try to say as little as possible. You're not there to police. You're there to name what's going on in the room, to contain the anxiety, and experiment with it, because this is an experiment in love. And I think it's the only way that we can really make sense of this idea of love your enemy, which I believe is an incredibly powerful idea. Okay, I'm just going to look to see if there's any questions. Hopefully some of that made sense. I appreciate that you're here. Kate, hello. At the risk of being picky, brilliant. When you say about loving your enemy in this structural way, what would that look like outside of the Death of God's Supper Club? How do you share your lack with non-paro people? Yeah, it's a great question, Kate, thank you. Kate is one of the prime people helping me to work out what this looks like in practice. So you've heard me say this before. I probably said this in some power seminars, but one of the reasons why I really liked the figure of Tammy Faye Baker and was part of making a documentary about her, which still is not sold, right? So we made it with Vice Studios, and it's beautiful. It's a 3-part or 4-part, sorry, documentary. It's a mini-series. It's really beautiful, but it's still it's still not sold, but it's out there. But the reason why we made this documentary about Tammy Faye Baker is because she was someone who it felt like she was unable to close herself off to the otherness of the other. There was something about how she conducted her life that she was always, so when people didn't like her, people slagged her off, people mocked her, she would go up and she would talk to those people, she would laugh at them, she would smile. There was this lack of defensiveness. And her husband Jim, who's a fascinating man, when he was attacked and when he was, like, everything went to pieces, he became more and more paranoid and reclusive. But she didn't. She threw herself more and more into the world. And probably it was the death of her, just like it was the death of Jesus, right? So these people, it's not a, I wouldn't say you should follow their example because it might kill you, but these are the examples of people who I think live a life in which they are open to the otherness of the other. And so, as I said, giving you examples of, Jesus who was crucified, Tammy Faye who, went through incredible pain and difficulties and addictions to drugs because of all of the pain that she had. And there's other people as well, I'm sure of them, but there is something about these figures as well that I do want to emulate. So what does it look like? My hope is if someone goes to the Death of God supper clubs and they practice this in a circle, it will help them in their workplace, in their family, whenever they're engaging with other people. It's never going to be easy, but the hope is what you practice performatively in these circles, in these communions, will loosen you up enough that it will have real world effects in terms of how you encounter someone who has a very different political view from you. I mean, because here's the thing my friend Chris said, is like, in these spaces, of course, you're going to have, suddenly it's going to be arguments about Israel and Palestine, or about Ukraine and Russia, or about, incredibly big things that are going on in the world. And it's like, yeah, God, how do you cope with that in one of these spaces? But hopefully the idea is that if we learn to somehow even argue in these spaces, and sometimes it gets a bit intense, and then we say, but I'm going to be here next week. This is a moral commitment. I'm going to be here next week and I'm going to sit down and we're going to do this again, right? That's the objective moral dimension. Psychologically, I don't want to do this. I'm not getting anything out of it subjectively, but I will sit here next week. That somehow that practice will have real world effects. So I don't know if that helps at all. That's just my initial response, is because I do think that this can work outside. And it's not about teaching anybody anything. It's literally about when you encounter someone. And a very practical example is, and we've talked about this before, but if someone's gone through a very difficult time and they share that with you, if you're comfortable enough with your own lack, you will find a way to not immediately try to solve the issue, to try to make it okay, to try to change the subject. You'll be able to stand with that vulnerability that they have given you. You'll be able to perceive it as a type of gift. And in being able to receive that gift of their suffering, that is something that will hopefully have a positive effect on them and potentially will create a stronger bond between you and that person. So that's what I think comes out of the practice, is that we will become better and better at being able to stand before the torrential tornado of the other's trauma. We will be able to kind of non-anxiously receive that as a type of gift. That's just some thoughts. Let's see, anybody else? This is some comments and thoughts. Andrew says, is the practice supposed to feel unpleasant? Because it kind of does. Here's my thoughts on that. I think sometimes yes and sometimes no. Like in therapy. Sometimes you might go to therapy and you go, I never want to go back to that. It's really unpleasant. And then sometimes you go to therapy and go, God, I feel amazing after that. That was incredible. And then often you feel nothing. More often than not, you go and go, like, is that a waste of time and money? I think it's quite similar. Like, I would like to say that more often than not, it will be pleasant and actually sometimes funny, and you'll come out feeling lighter. But I think I'd be lying. I think that does happen, but I think basically what this is the moral dimension is you go into it going, sometimes this is going to be unpleasant and difficult. Sometimes it's going to be boring and do nothing. And sometimes you're going to find it enlivening or funny, or you're going to kind of have some insight into yourself, and you're going to come away thinking about things. And I do want to think that it can be more the third, and maybe what I'd say is the more you do it, maybe the more it gets to the third. But I have to, let's all be honest and go, it's going to be unpleasant at times. And I say the more often one is it's probably just going to be boring sometimes. But I definitely know for a fact. So whenever Julie Reich was doing, she did stuff at Spark as well, and she was brilliant. She was doing stuff, she did these exercises, these non-self-help exercises that were beautiful. And she's actually doing a non-self-help course, or she's got a manual she's bringing out, and I'd recommend you look at it. But on the first day, the exercise that was after her talk was one in which, let me get this right, I think that was the first one where you introduced yourself and you said some failure in your life. And the thing was, she said, you can also lie and you can exaggerate, right? So in other words, if you don't really want to share something, you can just make a joke, right? But she says, but do share something, share a failure, say you can lie, you can joke, whatever, but share something. So everybody said their name and they shared that they are a failure, that they struggle, and they talked about that briefly. So that was the first one. The second day, the exercise was that you had to share a difficult experience in your life to the person beside you, and then that person shared it with everybody. And in this, the idea was partly, there's lots of complex and interesting things going on, but one of the things which is beautifully traumatic about this experience is that it showed that people never get it, right? That when you bear witness to someone else's suffering, no matter how much you bear witness to it, you never quite get it. There's always something that's not quite able to be articulated. And it's quite beautiful because we talk often about we want to bear witness to each other's suffering. That's deeply important. We bear witness, and part of communion is bearing witness to the other's trauma. But where we step up to the next level is when we realize that there's some dimension of our trauma that we cannot articulate. There is a dimension that everyone misses, including us. And we have to somehow be able to also tolerate, endure, and enjoy that dimension. But anyway, then the third exercise, which is the one I wanted to get to, was she got everybody to write jokes. Like basically it was a stand-up session where you created a small stand-up based on your own traumas and failures. And I remember this because I was in the other talk that Helen was doing, which is brilliant. But I was in the other room, all you could hear was everybody laughing. And what they were doing is they were talking about the darkest parts of their lives, but they were writing jokes about them. They were creating stand-up from them, and some of the people I think were sharing, some of the jokes. And it was beautiful because it's going like, it wasn't that they were saying, oh, it's not just the dark things, there's also some good things, right? That we can be happy and joyous about. It was going like, no, we can be happy and joyous about the dark things. we can find humor in that. And of course, great stand-up comedy is exactly that. It is the sublimation of our suffering, making it the hurt into humor. So anyway, sorry for waffling, but that's my way of going. Like, it should ultimately not be unpleasant. It should ultimately be joyous and light, but of course, it's going to be difficult at times. Let's see, any other, more people are writing as I'm talking. Thank you, people. Another question. I often feel that it's precisely because the other is mirroring back my own lack that I find it harder to love them. You're saying it will be easier. That's not my experience thus far. Okay, this is very good. Thank you. This is Uber. My eyes. My eyesight's always been so good, and only in the last couple of years it's starting to go a little bit. I'm kind of annoyed about it. I'm starting to now feel my age. So Uberland or something like that. Uber Leland. I often feel that it's precisely because the other is mirroring back my own lack that I find it harder to love them. You're saying it is easier, it's not my experience. No, I completely agree with you. I mean, this is, I think you're saying beautifully what Lacan said, which is like, love is giving what you do not want, or what you do not have to someone who doesn't want it. Like, in some respects, if I hear you right, it's like at first, this is why it's a moral position. This is why it's an objective position. It's almost like you initially have to force yourself to sit and listen to the other's lack. It can sometimes be a wonderful experience. So C.S. Lewis once mentioned how like there's a type of friendship in which you meet somebody for the first time and they love the same music, they love the same authors, and they have the same views, and you get on really well. And there's a certain friendship that comes from that. And then he says, and sometimes you meet somebody and they're completely different from you and you're arguing all the time, but you really love each other, like there's a real connection, but it's not because you share the same stuff, it's something else. So sometimes that otherness can be wonderful and can be beautiful, but as you say, often seeing the other's lack is difficult, it's painful, it's not natural, it's not something we want. It's precisely something we want to shield ourselves from. We want to shield ourselves from our own lack and from the other person's lack. And so what I like about what you're saying, which is a bit of a corrective to what I said to Andrew, is it is unpleasant. It is difficult. Now I was saying like it is unpleasant, it is difficult, sometimes it's boring and sometimes it's wonderful. But what I like about what you're saying is it's probably good to go into communion it's probably going to be initially unpleasant. It's going to be difficult, it's going to be painful. And yeah, because there's something about that lack that we don't want to experience. If I'm getting you right, I think that's a really important thing. That's why I like to call it moral. But we did the three, the material, the mental, and the moral. The reason, because I was initially using structural, doesn't begin with M either, but moral really resonated with me because I think it's a certain courage and commitment that we need to be able to do this because it's kind of unpleasant. But anyway, yes, thank you for that. Heather says, to me, this practice is profoundly peacemaking in nature, rather than trying to create peace based on finding common ground, which seems to break down because common ground breaks down so easily. Yeah, I mean, Heather's another person who's very deeply connected with us creating these spaces. And that's like Freud called this the narcissism of small differences. And there's that really famous joke, which I won't tell, but it's about, I think, two people who meet. I can't remember the comedian, but one's about to jump off a bridge and the other says you shouldn't do it because you've got so much to live for. And then they start talking and then they realize they've got so much in common. They, both Christians, and then they both go to the same church. They're both part of the same denomination, and it goes down and down and down until they find one tiny disagreement. And then the guy says, listen, you just go and jump, right? And so that's the narcissism of small differences. Is weirdly, the more you try to surround yourself with the same, you can't, because the otherness is always there. So the otherness will arise in some minor thing. That's why I don't know, in Northern Ireland there's something like, I don't know how many Presbyterian denominations there are. There's dozens, there's at least dozens of Presbyterian schisms, right? Who are all very close, but because you can never get common enough. So there's that story of this woman called Mary who started her own religion, and it was only Mary who was in the religion and her maid who cleaned her house. And she was interviewed by a paper once and said, is it true that like only you and your maid are going to get into heaven? And Mary looked at the interviewer and said, well, to be honest with you, I'm not too sure about the maid, right? That's the narcissism of small differences. So yeah, this attempt to surround yourself with the same always collapses. This is why pure communities will result in civil war and destruction of civilization. You need the commons, which are places where you meet people who are completely different from you, parks, libraries, whatever, and you need communions where you encounter the otherness. Yes, as you say, otherwise I think peacemaking is impossible. So yeah, thank you. Totally agree with you. Let's see, just some more comments. Blessed are those who weep, for they will laugh. I like that one. Blessed are those who weep, for they will laugh. There's something about that reminds me of that Julie Reich bit. There was something beautiful in it because she set up a space where people could mourn, they could encounter their own darkness. And I think it was difficult at times. And then on the last day, there was genuine, heartfelt laughter. Like, yeah, it was brilliant. It was heartfelt laughter. Oh yeah, Claire. Oh, brilliant, Claire. Claire is a psychotherapist who, again, is part of helping to form what these are. And I would quite like you to actually lead one at Wake if you're up for it. But, let's see. Would you say encountering the otherness or alterity of the other is contingent on us being able to encounter our own internal sense of being other or alien to ourselves? And does the Death of God's Supper Club facilitate this? Oh yeah, beautifully said, 100%. And the part of the thing for these communions, for me, is that it's a space where you're invited or seduced into sharing your own lack. The thing for me is, it's almost not that it starts with you, and then if you embody it, then the other does. It's more like you need to see it in the other. And as you see the other do it, it seduces you, entices you into doing it. It's a lure that brings you out. So, and the reason why I look at it like that, so in the idea of like, oh, I have to become very comfortable with my own lack, and I do this work myself, almost like individually. I do this work, and I, through sheer force of will, I'm able to, face my own lack or whatever. There's a few reasons why I don't think that works, but but one is it's almost like, it's a hero, it's a will thing. It's like I'm doing this myself, and I can pat myself on the back, I'm doing it. But actually in the other, it's like, oh no, I can only do it because I see it first of all mirrored in someone else. I was lucky enough that someone else gave me the gift of their lack. And in giving me the gift of their lack, that allowed me to see that within myself. And there's something much more about then the other is giving you a gift. This is very central to the liturgy as well, which is the idea that you need to see the lack in the liturgy first, which then allows you to encounter the lack within yourself. So in the coin thing that I'm doing on Patreon at the moment with the Cross of Contradiction, the idea is that the liturgy has doubt, ambiguity, and complexity built into the music and the spoken word, the sermon, the ritual, so that you are able to then open that up within yourself. So again, coming back to the Death of God's Supper Club, the idea is that if you're in that space and other people are giving you the gift of their lack, that will hopefully soften you up and me up to be able to offer my lack. And that's why I think it's a gift. So yeah, beautifully said, 100%. I think it's this reciprocal dimension, but interestingly, it's a dimension that I think we need to see mirrored in the other. And that's, by the way, as well, why I'm so interested in the liturgy of contradiction, but that's another thing. All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being with me in all of this. And I love the fact that I basically know most of you who are commenting now personally and really well, that we are becoming friends through all of this. That means the world. So thank you for your ongoing support and connection. And I will see some of you next week to discuss this in a Zoom.